At the company dinner for couples, she chose to sit next to her boss. It was that simple. In front of everyone. In front of me. As if our story had been a footnote. As if everything we had built together, the years of sacrifice, the sacrifices, the love sewn together in silence, in care, in routines, had lost its value in the face of the shine of a higher position and a well-tailored suit. She said this smiling, with a glass of wine in her hand, tossing her hair back and making that gesture of someone who sees no evil in anything, as she crossed the room with her eyes on his. Not on me. Not on us. I just said that I preferred to be with my children and stood up, my soul burning inside me. I left there with my stomach in knots and my heart in pieces. When she got home, all she found was silence, and a letter. My letter. In it, there were no insults. There was no apparent anger. Only truths, and the end. She destroyed her family to chase after something that would never hug her in the dark. And it was only when she felt the absence of little feet in the house, the toys out of place, the smiles at breakfast and the hugs at the end of the day, that she realized the choice she had made. But by then, everything had already changed. Betrayal doesn't happen suddenly. It begins with subtle details. In the look that shifts, in the touch that cools, in the good morning said with disdain, in the cell phone turned upside down. It begins when admiration gives way to impatience. When routine becomes an excuse for disinterest. It begins with a silent comparison between what one has and what one desires, between the comfort of home and the excitement of the new. I felt all of this. Every little cut before the stab. And no matter how much I tried to rescue what was once beautiful, I realized that she was already far away. Her body was present, but her thoughts were somewhere else. And the cruelest thing is that I didn't know exactly where, until she herself made it clear. I remember her smile that night. It was a smile I hadn't seen in months. A bright, vain smile. But it wasn't for me. It never is for someone who truly loves. It was the smile of someone who is desired by someone else. And that other person wasn't the father of her children. He wasn't the man who helped her build a home. He was her boss. The one she spent extra hours with at the office. The one she praised more and more, while forgetting what my touch was like, what our history was like. That night, when she ignored me to sit next to him, something inside me died. And something new was born, the certainty that I was no longer a priority, nor a presence, nor even an option. When I left dinner, I got into my car in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove down streets that knew our history. I remembered our first apartment, the hospital where our children were born, the bakery where she loved to buy croissants on Sundays. And with each memory, the taste of loss grew stronger. I knew I had to act. Not out of revenge, but out of respect for myself. And out of respect for my children, who deserved a whole father, not a man dragging chains from a broken marriage. When I got home, I sat down at the table where we had eaten dinner together so many times. I grabbed a pen and paper. I didn't type. I wrote by hand. Calmly. Each word carried the weight of what we were and what she had decided we would no longer be. The letter was a goodbye, but it was also a liberation. I was no longer willing to beg for love. To compete with status. To tolerate disrespect disguised as modernity. I left the letter on the table, packed my bags, and took our children with me. They slept, innocent, as if the world were still a fair place. And perhaps it still was, at least for those who decide not to submit to the mediocrity of a cowardly love. Silence was the first punishment she faced. The silence of an empty house. The silence of mornings without the noise of children. The silence of the closet without my clothes. The silence of the mirror, which no longer reflected a face admired by someone who loved her. When she read the letter, she came to her senses. But coming to her senses didn't change the fact, she had already lost me. She just didn't know how much. I tried to move on. In pain, yes. But with dignity. I saw in my children's eyes the fuel I lacked. With each hug from them, I remembered why I didn't give in. She tried to call. She sent messages. She sent flowers. She even tried to pick up her children from school, but they refused. The absence wasn't just mine. It was theirs too. They saw it. They felt it. Children understand more than we imagine. I didn't need to poison anyone against her. Life did that all by itself. And that was when the cruelest irony appeared. She tried to come back. Not because she loved me. But because she saw what she had lost. She saw that I had started over. She saw that another woman was by my side. A woman who didn't look at my status, but at my soul. Who laughed with me over stupid things and cried when I talked about my pain. A woman who was enchanted by the father I was, by the man who had withstood the shipwreck. And that was when my ex-wife, the one who preferred her boss, wanted to win me back. But it was too late. She insisted. She asked for forgiveness. She said it had all been a mistake, an impulse, a need. She cried. She begged. She tried to remind us of good times, trips, dates. But what she didn't understand is that regret doesn't rebuild what was crushed without remorse. You can glue a broken cup back together, but you'll never drink from it again without seeing the cracks. Her children refused her attempts to get closer. She cried at the school gate, but they turned their faces away. There was no more mommy and daddy. Only daddy. And he was enough. I was enough. Because, deep down, love is not proven with words, but with actions. And she chose, in front of everyone, to be something other than a wife, a mother, or a partner. I still remember the day she saw me with another woman. We were walking in the park, me, the boys and the new woman who had entered my life. She was holding hands with some random man, but she stopped when she saw us. Her gaze sought my eyes, but I was too busy living. The boys smiling, running, and the new woman laughing loudly by my side. A picture she no longer painted. A home she was no longer part of. And it was on that day that she understood, it wasn't just her husband she had lost. She had lost the chance to be remembered as someone who had cared, who had been there, who had done the right thing. Instead, she became a bitter memory. A present absence. An echo of bad choices. She tried to get back on her feet. She tried to get closer to her friends and family, but no one wanted to carry the weight of her decisions. She began to live in a cycle of regret that never ends. Because there is no greater pain than watching, from afar, the happiness that you yourself decided to abandon. She could have been a part of it. She chose to be a spectator. And it was late one afternoon, when she came back to look for me for the last time, that she understood once and for all. I greeted her at the door. She spoke between sobs, saying that she knew I loved her, that I was the only one who understood her, that she had made a big mistake, but that she still believed that we could rebuild. I listened in silence. And, with a firm look, I said, "You destroyed something that took years to build for something that lasted a few weeks. Now, I am the one who has rebuilt it. But without you." She looked at me, swallowing hard. And when she noticed the ring on my hand, a new ring, her eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Does she love you?" And I said, "She values me. And that's more than you've done in all our past years." She turned her back and left. Alone. While I went back to my home. My new home. With my children, with my peace, with the certainty that sometimes life knocks us down just to show us that we can fly higher. But what she never imagined, is that the new woman I married also had a history with her, a hidden connection that would be revealed at the worst possible time. Because not all peace is built without traces of the past. And the past, even when ignored, always comes back to collect. Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support any kind of betrayal, on the contrary, we show, through fictional stories, how devastating their consequences can be. Each story is a warning, a deep reflection on choices, values and irreversible losses. Get ready, because what you're about to hear now is shocking, intense and unforgettable. Let the story begin. Michael and Laura met on a sultry spring afternoon, during a get-together with mutual friends that seemed, at first glance, like one of those ordinary evenings that promised nothing more than idle chatter and excessive food. But all it took was a glance and an exchange of hesitant smiles for something deeper to begin to blossom there, amid poorly poured glasses of wine and loose jokes. She was a promising young executive who worked at one of the largest marketing agencies in the city, determined and admired by everyone for the way she balanced efficiency with natural charisma. He was a systems analyst, more reserved, passionate about technology, the kind of person who preferred the silence of an evening with books to the tumult of noisy parties. And perhaps it was exactly this difference that brought them together so strongly. They didn't complete each other, but they added to each other. And that was what enchanted everyone around them, they seemed whole, even though they were so different. Their courtship was quick but intense. In just over a year, they were married in a simple ceremony, surrounded only by their closest friends, and soon moved into a cozy house on the outskirts of the city, far from the bustling center, where the days passed slowly and the routine seemed tailor-made for the life they wanted to build together. Laura painted the living room walls in light tones, chose each piece of furniture carefully, and made sure to place a reading chair for Michael near the brightest window in the house. He, in turn, built a small office for her in the back, where she could work remotely and keep her career alive without having to be so far from home. And, in every detail, there was care. In every choice, there was love. It was as if they were writing a story together, page by page, and even when there was disagreement, there was also respect. And that was rare. The children came along over time, as a natural part of a life that seemed to follow a perfect script. First, Noah. Then, Emma. Two lively, smart children who turned the house into a whirlwind of toys, laughter, and childish screams. Michael, despite his shyness, proved to be a devoted father, the kind who woke up early to make pancakes, who made up bedtime stories, who cried in secret on his son's first day of school. Laura, despite her busy schedule and the constant demands of work, juggled to be present, juggling meetings and school presentations. They supported each other. When one fell, the other held them up. When one faltered, the other supported them. And that was their foundation, their partnership. Life wasn't perfect, of course. There were days of tiredness, impatience, and silly arguments that piled up and sometimes seemed to grow bigger than necessary. But there was also forgiveness, reconciliation, and that feeling that, in the end, everything would work out because the love was still there, strong, even if silent. The years went by, and with them came the inevitable changes, new positions, new schedules, less time together, more responsibilities. Laura began to grow in the company, gaining recognition, invitations to give lectures, and participation in corporate events. Michael, on the other hand, remained more stable, satisfied with his usual routine, with his technical and predictable work, but which gave him plenty of time to spend with his children, to take care of the house, to keep the structure running. This change in pace began to make itself felt, albeit subtly. Laura arrived later and later, often exhausted, often still connected to her cell phone or laptop while they ate dinner. Michael, accustomed to waiting for her, began to dine alone with the children. And, little by little, the silences grew. They weren't arguments. They were absences. Small gaps that, if not seen in time, turned into chasms. And it was at this stage that Laura's company began hosting couples dinners, formal events, but full of appearances, where smiles were studied and conversations were always strategic. Michael, even though he felt out of place, went with her. Out of love, out of companionship, out of a sincere desire to be by his wife's side, even when the environment was not favorable. At those events, Michael observed. He saw how Laura moved confidently among her colleagues, how her firm posture and command of speech attracted attention. He was proud, but he also felt an undefined discomfort, a feeling of distancing himself from something that was once his. Laura became, before his eyes, someone more distant, more concerned with projection and image than with the essence of before. It wasn't vanity, it was demand. The position demanded, the environment pressured. And he understood. Too much. He was the kind of man who, instead of confronting, retreated. Who preferred to keep quiet rather than express a feeling that might be interpreted as insecurity. But he saw it. He felt it. He noticed the looks that some colleagues gave her. He noticed the way she smiled differently at certain people. And even though there was no evidence, the discomfort was there. Alive. Present. Despite this, there was still affection at home. There were still hugs, there were still conversations about the children, plans for the future, comments about series, about trips they would like to take. There were still goodnight kisses, there was still laughter on sunny days in the backyard. Michael made an effort to keep the flame of everyday life alive. He prepared little surprises, left loving notes, brought coffee to bed when she overslept. And Laura smiled, thanked him, but soon immersed herself in her tasks again. It was as if time was a luxury she could no longer afford. And this, slowly, pushed the two of them into different worlds within the same house. The arrival of the new director at Laura's company coincided with a period in which she seemed even more absorbed by work. She would spend weekends away, justifying her absences with urgent conferences and meetings. Michael, although suspicious, tried to maintain her trust. He was not jealous, he was not controlling. He had always believed that love needed freedom to survive. But the absence was starting to hurt. Mainly because, even when they were together, Laura seemed absent-minded. As if she were always waiting for the next call, the next email, the next appointment. The children began to understand, too. Noah would often ask why his mother was always on the phone. Emma would complain when her mother didn't show up for school presentations. Michael would try to justify it, to make light of it, to make them feel less sorry. And yet, the little frustrations would pile up. The family structure, although seemingly solid, was beginning to suffer cracks that were invisible to the outside world, but deep enough to shake those who lived inside. The neighborhood saw them as the exemplary couple. The one everyone cited as a model of stability and mature love. But no one saw the nights when Michael slept alone in the living room because Laura came home too late. No one saw the wedding anniversaries forgotten because of a gathering. No one heard the silences between them when before there had been endless conversations. And perhaps that was the greatest paradox, they still loved each other, but they no longer saw each other. And then came dinner. The company dinner for couples. One of those events with everything timed, background music, long tables with names printed on gold cards. Laura was wearing an elegant dress, the same one Michael had given her for her previous birthday. She looked stunning. And he was proud, although nervous about being in an environment that made him uncomfortable. They sat together at first. But soon Laura began to move from table to table, greeting colleagues, exchanging laughs, touching shoulders familiarly. Michael watched in silence. And that was when everything began to change. There, that night, a gesture, a phrase, a seemingly small choice, would change everyone's destiny forever. And what seemed like just another formal dinner would become the milestone of the greatest pain in the life of a man who only wanted to love and be loved. But what really happened that night, and what came after, would only be revealed when the truth finally decided to come out of the shadows. Dinner began with soft lights reflecting off the perfectly arranged silverware, waiters circulating discreetly, and practiced smiles all around the room. Michael and Laura arrived together, but they didn't seem to be on the same page. He adjusted her necklace before entering, a delicate and affectionate gesture, while she absently answered a last message on her cell phone. She looked stunning, and he felt a certain silent pride, although a twinge of insecurity ran through him without him being able to name it. The room was full of important people, loud voices, names that circulated behind the scenes of decisions that changed the course of campaigns and careers. Laura seemed at home. He, a tolerated visitor. When they sat down, she positioned herself next to the CEO, an elegant, persuasive man with a quiet magnetism that required no effort to command the room. He was the kind of man who knew when to touch an arm during a joke, how to hold eye contact long enough to be memorable without being intrusive. Michael took in all this, a lump in his throat and the fork trembling slightly in his hand. Laura laughed differently that night. More freely, more lively. He knew every nuance of that laugh. And that wasn't a nuance of his. He heard the conversations, the whispers, saw the glances that passed over his head as if he weren't there. During dinner, she rarely spoke to him. She touched his shoulder with her fingertips, as if fulfilling a protocol of affection. When the director stood up to toast, she stood up too, and before Michael could even react, he heard her voice say naturally that she would rather sit at his table. His colleagues laughed, applauded the good humor of the phrase, but inside Michael everything broke. He smiled. Not really. Just as a last attempt to keep up an image that no longer existed. He answered dryly that he would rather go home to be with his children. He stood up. He didn't look back. And as he crossed the room, he knew that everyone was watching. But at that moment, he didn't care. On the street, the air felt colder than it actually was. He walked to the car as if he were walking on shrapnel. The silence inside the vehicle was more painful than any words she could have said. He drove aimlessly for a while before returning home. When he arrived, he went straight to the children's room. Emma was sleeping with her hair spread out on the pillow and a book open beside her. Noah, curled up, held the blanket with both hands as if he was afraid of losing it. Michael sat on the floor between the beds and stayed there for countless minutes. Everything he needed to keep breathing was there. They were his axis. The reason for his silences, his renunciations, his sleepless nights. As he watched them, he decided that this had to end. The farce, the illusion, the theater of a marriage that no longer existed. He knew that Laura would come back late and that, as always, she would enter silently and pretend to be normal. But he would not pretend anymore. He spent the rest of the night writing. Not messages, not emails, but a letter. He wrote as if he were bleeding. Without hatred, but with precision. He exposed everything he felt, everything he noticed. He didn't mention names, he didn't make accusations. He just described the absence, the cold, the silent abandonment that had taken over the house. When he finished, he placed the letter on the living room table, packed a suitcase with clothes for himself and his children, grabbed documents and favorite toys, and left before sunrise. He took Emma and Noah to his sister's house, a strong and understanding woman who had always been his safe haven in times of rupture. He explained, with a trembling voice, that he needed a few days away. She didn't ask any questions. He just offered her the guest room and made pancakes for his nephews. Michael stood there, between knowing glances and silent coffees, trying to understand how someone he swore to love could simply disappear. Laura arrived home around 2 in the morning. She walked in barefoot, taking off her shoes at the door, as usual. The house was dark, too quiet. She called out softly for Michael, as if she were afraid of waking the children. But there was no answer. She turned on the living room light and saw the letter. She sat down to read it, and as her eyes ran over the lines written in her husband's firm, sober handwriting, the blood rushed to her face, then froze. She didn't cry right away. First came disbelief. Then fear. She went to the bedrooms. Empty. No sign of the children. His closet, partially emptied. His sock drawer open. His perfume still lingering in the air like a ghost of what had been. And only then did she cry. Sitting on the floor in the hallway, alone, with her knees drawn up to her chest, trying to find a justification for what was happening. But deep down, she knew. In the days that followed, she tried to contact him countless times. She sent messages, left voicemails, and wrote emails. All of them went unanswered. She called his sister, who calmly told her that Michael needed space. She tried to pick up her children, but Noah said he didn't want to go. Emma pretended to be sick. She began to live between remorse and anger, without knowing exactly who or what she was feeling. At work, she began to operate on autopilot. The director, who had previously been a source of laughter and exchanged glances, now seemed like a shadow of something she no longer wanted to see. She avoided the meeting rooms and made excuses not to eat lunch in the cafeteria. The house, which had once been alive, had become a tomb of memories. Every corner carried the absent presence of her husband and children. Every sound seemed to echo what she had lost. It was a rainy morning when she decided to go to the children's school. She waited at the door, pretending to be just another distracted mother. When Emma came out by her uncle's hand, she ran towards him and hugged him tightly. Laura approached, trying to smile, but the girl shrank into her uncle's lap, refusing her mother's touch. Michael watched everything from afar, leaning against the car. Laura walked over to him. She asked for a chance to talk. He looked at her for a few seconds and simply said that he wasn't right now. And he got back into the car. She stood there in the rain, not knowing if what was running down her face was the water from the sky or the reflection of the emptiness that was growing inside her. At the end of that same week, the company organized another event. A more intimate dinner, just for executives. Laura almost didn't go. But she decided to attend, perhaps in an attempt to rediscover something of herself. It was there that the director approached her again, as if nothing had happened. Smiling, he offered her a glass of wine, complimented her dress, and talked about upcoming business trips. Laura forced a smile. He mentioned the previous dinner, the phrase she had said, that light-hearted joke that had caused laughter. But she didn't laugh. The phrase echoed in her mind with the weight of a punch. She could no longer hear it without feeling ashamed, regretful, guilty. She left the event early, drove to Michael's sister's house, and stood there, outside, looking at the lit window of the room where Noah was playing with a doll. She didn't have the courage to ring the doorbell. And then, without warning, on a random afternoon, the phone rang. It was Michael. His voice was firm. He said he agreed to talk, without rushing, in a neutral place. They arranged to meet at a discreet cafe. She arrived first, just like old times. She carried with her a letter she had written the night before. Not as a reply to his, but as an attempt to say everything that had not fit into words over the last few years. He arrived punctually, wearing a blue shirt that she had bought herself for a birthday. They sat across from each other. The conversation was calm, without accusations. Laura talked a lot. She cried. She told him about her tiredness, about her silent loneliness, about her fear of losing herself in her own routine. Michael listened. He interrupted very little. In the end, she gave him the letter. He put it away without reading it. He said he needed time. And he said goodbye with a kiss on her cheek. She felt that that kiss was a farewell. The following week, Michael sent her the divorce papers. There was no dispute. She signed. And as she did so, she felt as if each stroke of her signature erased a chapter of her life that she would never be able to rewrite. But something was yet to come. Something that would change everything even more definitively. Because as much as she believed she had only lost her husband and children, Laura still didn't know what was really at stake. The secret that was about to emerge would turn her regret into something even more devastating. And once again, she would not be prepared. Laura spent weeks dealing with the echoes of absence, trying to resume a routine that no longer made sense. The house now seemed bigger, the rooms emptier, the hours longer. The days came with the slight sensation that everything around her continued, except for her. She went to work, did her chores, came home, but something inside was suspended, as if life were stuck on hold. Sometimes, she found herself standing at the door of her children's room, smelling the toys that were still at the bottom of the drawer, leafing through albums that seemed to be from another life. The photos with Michael, the trips, the spontaneous hugs from the children, everything now had a weight. A reminder of what had been. And of what she herself had pushed away. She tried to write to him, tried to rehearse excuses, rehearse justifications. But they all seemed small compared to what she had caused. A month after the divorce was finalized, she decided to try something different. She wanted to at least see her children. She thought about going to school again, but remembered Noah's last look and backed away. She called Michael's sister, who answered with a dry voice and said that the boys were fine, but they didn't want to see her right now. Laura thanked her and hung up before her emotions betrayed her. It was then that, one afternoon, while walking aimlessly through a park where she usually went with the children, she saw a scene in the distance that paralyzed her. Michael was walking hand in hand with Emma, and next to him, a woman. Tall, with light brown hair, a serene expression. The woman carried Noah on her shoulders and laughed with him in a way so natural, so intimate, that Laura felt her stomach turn. For a moment, she thought about going there. But he couldn't move his feet. He remained behind a tree, watching. Emma pointed at something and the woman patiently bent down to listen. Michael placed his hand lightly on her back. And there, in that simple scene, Laura realized that something had changed definitively. Michael had moved on. And what she saw in his eyes was peace. That night, Laura couldn't sleep. The image of the four of them in the park kept repeating itself like a torturous movie. She tried to rationalize it, to think that maybe she was just a friend, someone temporary. But deep down, she knew. She was another woman. And not just any woman. There was something about that gesture, that presence, that made her seem like part of the family. It wasn't casual. It was built. And Laura, for the first time, felt afraid of being forgotten. Not just left. Forgotten. As if her presence in Michael's life was being replaced, little by little, quietly but surely. And that was exactly what was happening. 2 days later, Laura plucked up the courage and sent him a message. She asked to talk to him. Just talk. No pressure, no demands. Michael responded politely and arranged to meet at a discreet coffee shop at the end of a residential street. She arrived early and sat by the window, trying to find words. He walked in a few minutes later, calm, his gaze lighter than she remembered. He sat down and waved goodbye. She began speaking slowly, saying that she had seen him in the park, that it hadn't been intentional, that she had just been passing by chance. He simply said that he imagined it would happen sooner or later. Then, in a hesitant voice, Laura asked about the woman he was with. Michael looked at her for a few seconds before answering. He said he had met this woman shortly after leaving home. That she also came from a difficult marriage, that she also had children, and that, unlike Laura, she didn't make him feel small. She didn't need promises or grand gestures for him to realize that there was a possibility of rebuilding their relationship. Laura swallowed hard, and then, almost in a whisper, asked how they had met. Michael was silent for a moment. Then he took a deep breath and said there was something she needed to know. It was then that he revealed. The woman he was dating was Marina. Laura's eyes widened, her chest tightening. She knew that name. Marina was a psychologist. But that wasn't all. Marina had been her best friend for years. They had met in college and had been inseparable, but they had drifted apart after a professional misunderstanding. At the time, Laura had underestimated Marina's talent during a project presentation, and the two never spoke again. Marina followed another path, graduated with honors, and began working in the clinical field. And it was precisely during Michael's darkest phase that they crossed paths. He was seeking psychological support to deal with the grief of his broken marriage, and Marina was the first professional he recommended. When Marina saw him arrive at the appointment, Marina recognized the name, and throughout the sessions, with ethics and care, she created a genuine bond with him. When Michael discovered the connection between them, he hesitated, but continued. And it was outside the office, after the end of the treatment, that they got closer. First, as two survivors of the same hurricane. Then, like two hearts that finally found shelter. Laura couldn't react. Her hands were sweating, her heart was beating as if it were going to burst out of her mouth. Michael continued. He said he hadn't looked for Marina. That everything had happened naturally, over time. That there had been no plan. That he had never imagined that the woman with whom he now shared smiles and tranquility had been part of Laura's past. But when he found out, he decided not to walk away. Because, for the first time in a long time, he felt seen. Laura tried to hold back the tears, but they came. And along with them, a devastating feeling of having been defeated. Of having lost not only her husband, but her story, her role, her space. She stood up abruptly, not knowing what to say. Michael asked her to sit down again. He said that, despite everything, he would never use that to hurt her. That there was no irony, no revenge. Just a new beginning. And that he sincerely hoped that one day his children would be able to see in the two women in their lives something other than rivalry. Laura didn't answer. She left the cafe feeling the world spin, as if each step was another step down a hole she had dug herself. That night, alone at home, she reread the letters she had written to Michael and had never had the courage to send. The words now seemed fragile, irrelevant. He had rebuilt her. With someone she would never have imagined. Someone who knew her weaknesses, her defects, her vanities. And perhaps because of that, someone who knew exactly how not to be like she had been. The betrayal she had believed to be the height of her mistake now seemed small compared to the pain of seeing her own life go on without her. Michael had not just moved on. He had been welcomed, loved, healed by a woman who knew his past. And she was alone with the remains of what she had destroyed. But there was still something left. One last gesture. Something she needed to do, not to win him back, but to at least be able to live with some semblance of dignity. Something that only she knew. Something that would change, once again, the course of that story. Because as much as he believed he had already heard everything, there was still a truth that had never been told. And that truth was about to come to light. The morning after the revelation, Laura woke up with her mind in turmoil. The room remained dark, even with the curtains half open. The world outside seemed distant, as if she were watching her own life through a foggy window. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor for long minutes. The events of the previous day wouldn't leave her head, the way Michael spoke, the serenity in his eyes, the absence of anger, the clear tone of his words. He wasn't there for revenge. He didn't throw truths like knives. He just kept going. And he kept going with Marina. Marina, of all people. The one who had once been her confidant, who knew her most intimate secrets, who knew her insecurities, her impulses, her quirks. Laura got up slowly, walked through the hallway of the house without turning on the lights, as if the darkness were a shelter where she didn't have to face the wreckage. He sat down at the kitchen table, picked up the still empty coffee mug, and stared at it as if searching for some explanation. But all that came was the heaviness. A new heaviness, denser, colder. It wasn't just regret. It was the brutal awareness of the magnitude of the loss. Hours later, she left home with no clear direction. She walked through the streets, watching couples, children playing, people carrying grocery bags, as if the world remained untouched by the internal tragedy that consumed her. She wanted to scream, but there was no one to hear. She wanted to apologize, but there were no words. She was overcome by a distant memory, of a conversation with Marina from her college days. They were lying on the grass, exchanging confidences. Marina talked about the fear of never being enough for anyone, of always feeling like she was the second option. Laura, between laughter and advice, assured her that she would still find someone who would see her completely. Fate, in its cutting irony, turned that sentence into a cruel omen. The woman who once felt invisible now lived in the heart of the man Laura lost by being absent from him when it mattered most. As the afternoon drew to a close, he decided to write. But this time, not letters. Not speeches. He decided to send a direct message to Marina. He looked up her old number and, to his surprise, it was still saved on his phone. His hands were shaking as he typed. He asked to meet her. He said he didn't want to argue, just talk. He was sincere. He said he needed to cleanse his soul somehow. Marina responded with a simple, "Okay, tomorrow afternoon is fine." The suggested place was a small, discreet cafe on a street with few passers-by. When she arrived the next day, Laura was no longer the same haughty woman she had been before. She wore neutral clothes, no makeup, no adornments. Just herself, in her rawest version. Marina arrived punctually, as she always was. She was serene, with an indecipherable look in her eyes. They sat face to face, the low sound of the cafe filling the gaps between the silences. Laura began. She said she didn't know how to start, that she didn't even know if she deserved to be there. Marina didn't answer. She just waited. Laura then told him everything. Not about Michael, or the pain of seeing them together. But about herself. About how he had lost his way along the way. He talked about the pressures of work, the constant need to prove himself, to stay relevant, to not fail. He talked about the suffocating feeling of always being one step away from failure, of having to maintain an image, even if it cost him his heart. And finally, he confessed the reason for their separation in the past. He said he knew that what he had done, leaving Marina aside because of a project, was not justifiable, but at the time, he had chosen his ego over friendship. Marina remained silent for what seemed like an eternity. Then, in a firm tone of voice, she said that she didn't hold any grudges, but that she wouldn't forget either. He said that forgiveness is something that comes with time and that, at that moment, the only thing he wanted was peace for everyone involved. Laura thanked him, her eyes brimming with tears, and then said what she had been keeping to herself. She said that Michael was a rare man. That he was the only one who knew all sides of her and stayed. That she had made a mistake in pushing him away, in not seeing how much he gave of himself. That she felt ashamed for not having valued him. And, most importantly, that she now understood the importance of his presence, not as a husband, but as a human being. Marina, with a measured look, replied that she knew that. And that Michael did not speak ill of her. That he had never used the past to tarnish his ex-wife's image in front of their children. He had only said that things had changed. And that now he needed to be happy in a different way. Before they said goodbye, Laura took a small box out of her bag. Inside was an old necklace that Marina had lent her many years before, but which she had never returned. Marina smiled slightly, touching the object as if revisiting memories. She thanked her. And in that silent gesture, something healed. Not enough to forget, but enough to move on. In the days that followed, Laura plunged into a difficult internal process. She sought help, resumed therapy, started visiting her parents more often, and called siblings she rarely spoke to. She was trying, with timid steps, to rescue parts of herself that she had neglected for years. But the emptiness was still heavy. Above all, she wanted to see her children. And that was exactly the opportunity that arose when Michael sought her out, asking to talk. They met in a park near the children's school, on a wooden bench under the shade of an old tree. Michael said that the children had started asking about their mother, about the reason why she didn't visit them. He said he believed that the time had come to allow this reunion. Laura took a deep breath, held back her tears, and simply thanked him. She didn't ask for more. She didn't pressure. I knew that, at that moment, every step forward was an achievement. The first visit was brief. Emma was shy, Noah more reserved. Laura brought books, old toys, homemade cookies. They talked a little, but they laughed. She didn't force hugs. She was just there. At the end, Michael came over and said that this was the beginning. That time would tell what would happen next. And that he hoped that everyone, especially the children, would come out of this story less hurt than when they went in. It was on one of those afternoons, after yet another visit with her children, that Laura decided to leave a final letter for Michael. Not with requests. Not with pleas. But with truths. She revealed, in so many words, that from the beginning she knew that the relationship with him was much more than she deserved. He told her that, some time before the separation, she had been promoted not only because she deserved it, but also because of the favor of the director she had been involved with. She said that when she saw Michael at dinner, she knew she had crossed a line from which she could not return. But what she never told him, and now she told him, was that, before the separation was finalized, she had been invited to take a position abroad. A proposal that would mean being away from her children, from home, from everything. And she refused. Not out of love. But out of fear of being forgotten. Because even in her vanity, there was something that kept her connected to the story she had built. And even knowing that she no longer deserved the place of his wife, she still carried the weight of having rejected something for a love that was no longer hers. Michael read the letter a few days later. He didn't reply. But at the next meeting, he gave her a drawing that Emma had made. In it, the girl drew a house with 3 hearts, one with her father's name, another with hers, and a third with no name. When Laura asked who it was, Emma replied with a smile, "It's Marina. Because she takes care of us now. But you can draw it too, if you want." Laura smiled. A small, humble, painful smile, but genuine. She picked up the colored pencil and drew another heart. With no name. Because she knew that now, more than being remembered, she needed to finally learn to just be present. Even if, for the first time, that didn't guarantee her the center of the story. Laura began to realize that time was no longer her ally. It did not heal, it only transformed the weight of guilt into something denser, more silent. The weeks passed like leaves in the wind, and even though her routine was technically in order, work resumed, appointments fulfilled, meals made, something inside her remained suspended, as if she lived a life in black and white where sound seemed muffled. She began to visit a square near her apartment every morning before work, sitting on the same bench, watching mothers with small children, ladies talking to their dogs, and young people running around the garden. There, in that scenario of lives that went on naturally, she confronted her own paralysis. She had made so many decisions on impulse, so many times had she left what was essential aside in the name of status, control, or pride, that now she no longer knew if she could recognize who she really was. Visits to her children began to happen more regularly, always supervised, at set times, and with Michael nearby, even if distant in words. He always maintained a respectful demeanor, but it wasn't hard to see that something inside him had changed. There was no more resentment, no more hostility. It was as if he saw her through the eyes of a stranger, someone who had been part of a chapter that had already closed, and that, for Laura, hurt more than any shouting or argument. Because the silent contempt of those who once loved us has a much deeper impact than open hatred. During one of the visits, Emma showed her mother a sketchbook where she had pasted magazine clippings and made collages with words she had heard in conversations at home. One page caught her attention. On it were cut out the words, family, new, present, and heart, all connected by colored lines drawn by the girl. Laura asked what that meant, and Emma answered, without hesitation, that it represented the new house where she and her brother were living, with their father and Marina. She said that everything was calm there, that meals were eaten together, that bedtime stories were back, and that everyone had learned to listen to each other without rushing. Laura nodded, holding back a smile, but felt her heart break into small, invisible pieces. It wasn't just the home that had changed. It was the bonds. Affections had been reorganized, and she, even though she was the mother, now occupied a peripheral place, as someone her children loved but who was no longer the axis of their universe. The pain was bitter, but it was fair. One Saturday night, Laura received an unexpected invitation. It was an email from the children's school, inviting both parents to the end-of-semester performance. A play in which Noah would be one of the main narrators and Emma would play one of the fairies from the Enchanted Forest. The invitation, simple and formal, moved her. I knew I would have to share the stage with Michael and Marina. He knew that there he would have no control over the emotions that the scene would evoke. But I also knew that I had to go. For the first time, not to try to recover something, but simply to be there. On the day of the performance, he arrived early, sat at the back of the auditorium and waited. When Michael arrived with Marina and the children, Laura lowered her eyes. There was no exchange of glances, no embarrassed smiles. Just the naturalness of someone who understood their place. Noah walked onto the stage with a paper in his hands and a confidence that she had never seen before. Emma, wearing a crown made of dried leaves, paraded among the characters as if she belonged to that enchanted world. When the presentation ended, everyone applauded. Michael stood up with a genuine smile. Marina hugged the little ones tenderly. Laura remained seated for a moment longer. She applauded, but she also said goodbye. She said goodbye to the image she once had of her own family. Now, all that was left was to accept it. On the way home, Laura reflected on the dilemma that was taking hold within her. Should she try to rebuild her life based on the scraps of what was left or create something completely new, taking on the blame and limitations of what was no longer hers? She felt that there was no right path. She only knew that she needed to make a decision. In the following days, she sought out an NGO that supported women in situations of emotional vulnerability. She began to attend meetings and volunteered to teach communication and writing workshops for women who, like her, had lost their way at some point along the way. There, amidst difficult stories, she found her own voice again. She realized that, even with the pain she carried, she could somehow contribute. Not to erase her mistakes, but to give some meaning to the scar. Meetings became part of her routine. And, little by little, she began to rebuild an identity that did not depend on anyone's gaze. Michael heard about the workshops from Emma. Emma had told him over Sunday lunch that her mother was now helping sad women feel strong again. He simply listened. Later, he sent Laura a short message congratulating her on the initiative. It was the first time in months that he had communicated without a practical purpose. Laura responded with just a "thank you." That small, restrained exchange marked a new stage. There was no longer any tension or dashed hopes. Only respect and a silent recognition of how much they had both changed. It was during this new era that life decided to turn around once again. One day, at the end of a workshop, Laura was approached by a woman who had been participating for a few weeks. Her name was Clara. She invited her for coffee. They talked for hours. Clara was a teacher, divorced, mother of a teenager, and had the same mix of pain and dignity in her eyes that Laura knew so well. They exchanged experiences, confidences, and shy laughter. The encounter was repeated over the following days. Without realizing it, Laura began to feel alive again. Not in the romantic sense, but as someone who had finally found a companion who didn't demand justifications or demand paperwork. She simply existed and shared. Michael, for his part, continued firmly on his new path. His relationship with Marina grew steadily, without rushing. His children adapted to the new family structure more naturally than expected. And although he still preserved memories of the past, he no longer used them as a reference. The pain had been replaced by maturity. A serene understanding that not all love lasts forever, but that each love, in its time, is necessary. One day, during a conversation with Marina, he confessed that he would never have moved on if he hadn't fallen so much. Marina simply held his hand and said that falling is often the only way to make us stop and look at the ground we walk on. And he understood. Laura, on a sunny afternoon, sitting with Clara on the same bench in the square where she used to go alone, said that she didn't want to rush into anything. That she was learning to live with silence, with absence, with memory. Clara replied that self-love is usually the last thing to be rebuilt. And that when it comes with a quiet force, without fanfare. Laura smiled. Not the smile of someone who has won. But the smile of someone who, after a long time, has stopped running away from herself. The days stretched out with a new flavor. The pain was still there, but tamed. Visits to the children became more natural, with shy laughter and spontaneous conversations. Marina began to participate in these transitions with kindness, without imposing barriers. Michael kept a respectful distance, but, little by little, the meetings began to lose the weight of tension. A new silent pact had been established. And in that pact, the only non-negotiable clause was, to move on in peace. But life, with its own way of surprising us, still had one last twist in store. A new movement that, without asking permission, would place everyone before a new choice. A situation where love, forgiveness and responsibility would be definitively tested. Because even when we believe we have overcome everything, destiny challenges us to truly prove how capable we are of changing. The last quarter of the year was approaching, and with it came the feeling that a new cycle needed to begin. Laura, now more centered, had managed to reorganize her life based on more mature choices. Her relationship with Clara had not turned into a romance, as many might have expected, but had become something rarer and more necessary, a true friendship, the kind that comes without demands and grows in silence, sustained by mutual understanding. The two shared Sunday coffees, morning walks, trips to the movies, and long conversations about everything they had experienced, lost, and still dreamed of recovering. For the first time in a long time, Laura began to feel like she belonged to something that did not require performance. But there was still a layer of her story that was unresolved, and she knew it. It was not enough to have accepted the separation, nor to have recognized her mistakes. The issue was deeper. She needed to understand the role she had played in the pain of others and how this shaped the present of the people she loved most. It was late one afternoon, while organizing materials for a workshop on reconciliation, that she received an unexpected call from the children's school. The pedagogical coordinator requested a meeting with the parents, as Noah had been having difficulties in class, especially with emotional issues. Nothing alarming, according to the voice on the other end of the line, but something that deserved joint attention. Laura showed up immediately and, to her surprise, Michael also confirmed his attendance. They met at the school door, exchanged a brief greeting and walked together to the meeting room. Marina was not there. There, they were met by a school psychologist, who gently explained that Noah had shown signs of anxiety, frequently asking about the family's future. He was afraid that everything would change again. That his mother would disappear again. That his father would stop smiling. That Marina would leave too. Michael remained silent, his eyes slightly teary. Laura, visibly shaken, asked if the boy had said anything else. The psychologist answered yes, that Noah had recently drawn a house with many doors. Each door, according to him, represented a phase of life. And his mother was always knocking outside, like someone who wanted to get in but never knew the password. After the meeting, they left together, with no clear direction. Michael, with his hands in his pockets, said that maybe it was time to change some approaches. That Noah needed to know that his mother was not just a figure from the past, but someone present, with a place and value. Laura thanked him, her voice breaking, and said that she really wanted to be a part of this, but that she was afraid of being seen as someone who was trying to get back. Michael answered honestly that this was no longer an option. But that he understood the importance of a mother's presence, especially now. "You will always be their mother," he said, in a tone that mixed firmness and compassion. She didn't answer. She just nodded subtly. A few days later, Laura started picking up the children from school once a week, alternating with Michael. They weren't long meetings, but they were meaningful. She took them for snacks, took them for short walks, helped with their homework. Little by little, the children began to open up more. Emma asked about old recipes, Noah showed her drawings and made jokes. The barrier between them did not disappear overnight, but it began to lose strength. It was one of those afternoons, while walking with her children to an ice cream shop, that Emma asked a question that completely disarmed Laura. "Mom, why don't you live with us anymore?" Laura stopped. She took a deep breath. And, crouching down to her daughter's level, she replied that she had made choices that had driven important people away, but that she was learning to be better, even if that didn't mean going back to the same place. Emma simply said that she missed us. Noah, who had been watching silently, held his mother's hand tightly and added, "But now you're here." That was more than a comfort. It was a gift. A sign that, despite the setbacks, there was still room for reconstruction. Later that week, Michael invited Laura to lunch at a quiet restaurant. The invitation had no hidden agendas or hidden intentions. It was simply an attempt to align their new routines, calmly discuss the challenges of shared parenting, and understand how they could navigate the coming months in a healthier way. The meeting was civilized and respectful, but at a certain point, Laura plucked up the courage to ask about Marina. She wanted to know how she dealt with all of that. Michael, with a sincere look, said that Marina was mature, understanding, and, above all, generous. She never tried to take the place of mother, that she always respected the children's space, and that, from the beginning, she knew that their family could not be built on the ruins of another. Marina had won the affection of the little ones with patience, without imposition. And for that very reason, she was respected by everyone, including him. Laura listened in silence. She heard about a woman she had once underestimated. Who she had neglected emotionally, who she had pushed away for fear of being overshadowed. And now, this same woman was part of her children's core of happiness. That, although difficult to digest, taught a powerful lesson. The world does not revolve around punishing. It revolves around teaching. Michael excused himself for a moment and went to the bathroom. Laura was left alone at the table, slowly fiddling with her napkin. At that moment, a lady sat down next to her, not realizing that it was a reserved table. She apologized, but ended up striking up a conversation. She said she was waiting for her grandson, who would come pick her up after her violin lesson. Laura smiled, saying that she was also reorganizing her life because of her children. The lady replied something that stuck in her mind: children are roots. Even when we don't see them, they hold us firmly to the ground. The sentence sounded like a whisper of redemption. A few days later, Laura received news that would change the tone of the next chapters. The NGO where she worked as a volunteer invited her to take on a coordination role in a project to support women in life transition. The project involved short trips, lectures, and meetings with professionals in the fields of psychology and law. It was an opportunity to use pain as a tool for collective transformation. But there was one detail: some of these trips would take place on the same days as visits with her children. The dilemma soon arose. For the first time since her divorce, Laura would have to choose between expanding her new purpose or remaining consistent in rebuilding her relationship with Emma and Noah. She spoke to Clara, who advised her to follow her feelings, not what the world expected. She spoke to the project coordinator, who was flexible but made it clear that there would be unavoidable commitments. Finally, she decided to speak to Michael. She explained everything, honestly. She said she didn't want to give up either side, but that she knew the consequences. Michael listened attentively. He said he understood, but that the children were still at a fragile point, and that her absence from some meetings could reopen wounds. "I'm not saying give up," he added, "but make sure that if you do go, you come back different. Not just for them, but for yourself." Laura spent days thinking about it. Each answer came with a weight. But in the end, she decided to accept the invitation. Not as an escape, but as a statement. She would go, yes, but with a plan to return. With well-defined commitments. With videos recorded for her children, with letters, with promises that she, this time, would make sure to keep. When she told Emma and Noah, they both listened attentively. Emma asked if she would come back. Noah, this time, did not remain silent. He simply said, "Just don't forget to send a picture of your breakfast." Laura laughed, excited, promising that she would send it every day. She knew it would not be easy. But, for the first time, she was leaving for something that she had built alone. And she was not running away from anyone. Running away was what she had done before. Now, she was moving on. And she knew that, when she returned, something new would await her. Something she had not yet known. But that was beginning to resemble peace. The months passed with the peculiar speed of a time that does not ask permission to pass, and Laura, now with a routine marked by trips, meetings and rooms full of women rebuilding, began to realize that the pain that once defined her had become the raw material for something greater. She was no longer driven by regret, but by the responsibility of giving it meaning. In each workshop taught, in each story shared, she revisited parts of herself, a woman who tried to hold on to a marriage with hands wet with ego, who mistook power for affection, who allowed the silence between her and her husband to grow until it became an abyss. But it was no longer about self-flagellation. It was now about taking ownership of her own life and offering other women the chance to also re-signify their failures. However, as much as the present was full of purpose, there was a part of her heart that always returned home. Missing her children came like a cold wind on hot mornings, and even with video calls, exchanged audio messages and drawings sent by mail, the emptiness of absence remained there, like a reminder that love, when wounded, takes time to heal completely. One gray afternoon, when Laura returned from a lecture in another city, she found a letter in her mail. It was from Emma. The childish handwriting was full of maturity and emotion. In the letter, the girl said that she missed her mother's hugs, bedtime stories, and even the times when she would complain about the mess of her toys. She said that she knew her mother had changed, that her father spoke well of her now, and that Marina also spoke fondly about how Laura was helping other people. Emma ended by asking her to come back whenever possible to spend a whole week with them, like in the old days. Laura cried when she read it. She cried with the freedom of someone who no longer needed to hold back. She cried because she knew that her reconquest would not come in the form of a return to the past, but of staying in the present. She asked for time off, rearranged her commitments, and, for the first time in a long time, returned to the city, not for formal meetings, but simply to be a mother. The week with her children was sweet and, at the same time, full of nuances. Emma showed precocious maturity, while Noah, more reserved, observed his mother's every gesture with the eyes of someone testing whether the promise of her return was real. Laura dedicated herself to every moment. She cooked with them, played, helped with their homework, watched movies under the same blanket. She didn't try to prove herself. She was just there. On the last day of the visit, Michael called her for a chat in the backyard. They sat close, watching the children play with Marina in the background. He said he didn't know what would happen from then on, but that the children had been calmer since she returned. He also said that he saw in her another woman, not the one who left, nor the one who hurt, but the one who learned. Laura thanked him silently. Michael finished by saying that, despite all the suffering, what touched him most was seeing that, even after the destruction, everyone had managed to find a place of dignity. She held back her tears, not out of sadness, but out of respect for the moment. Because, at that moment, I was in front of a man who, even though he had been injured, chose to end the story with humanity. Months later, Michael and Marina made their union official at an intimate event, attended only by close friends and their children. Laura was invited. She didn't hesitate. She showed up wearing a simple dress, without extravagant makeup, but with the serene posture of someone who knew the place she now occupied. During the vows, Marina spoke about rebuilding, about the power of embracing, and about loving someone for who they become, not for who we expected them to be. Michael thanked her for her ability to also love the children she didn't have. Laura applauded. There was no pain. There was a rare kind of peace. At the end of the ceremony, Emma ran up to her with a cupcake in her hand, saying that there was one left especially for his mother. Noah followed close behind, smiling shyly. And in that group hug, something was sealed forever. In the following years, Laura remained close to her children. Visits became more frequent, and bonds were reformed with patience and truth. Clara, her faithful friend, stayed by her side, becoming a natural part of the family. Michael and Laura maintained a cordial, almost fraternal relationship. Marina and she began to respect each other with a maturity that few could achieve. Has time healed? Perhaps not completely. But it has taught. And this teaching was enough to transform the end of a story of betrayal into a lesson in transformation. Michael, after so many ups and downs, found the serenity he had been searching for. Alongside Marina, he learned to experience love in a light-hearted way, without ghosts from the past, without suffocating demands. He became an even more present and empathetic father. He forgave not out of weakness, but because he understood that sometimes forgiveness is the only possible bridge between what we were and what we can be. Marina, in turn, showed that love is not about possession, but about surrender. And that being strong is not just about enduring, but knowing how to welcome even those who once hurt us indirectly. Emma and Noah grew up surrounded by true affection. They learned about mistakes, about consequences, but, above all, about starting over. Laura, who in the past exchanged presents for status, understood that no professional success is worth the silence of a child, the separation from a husband she loved in silence, or the emptiness of a home where there used to be laughter. Today, she lives a simple life, but full of meaning. She continues to help other women, give lectures, write, reflect. Is she still alone? Maybe in some aspects. But never lonely again. Because she learned, the hard way, that love requires presence, listening and truth. That every choice has a price. And that there is not always a way back. But there are new paths. And, sometimes, these paths lead us exactly to the place where we should have always been. Now that you've made it this far, tell us what you think of this story in the comments. Your opinion is very important to us. And if you're not subscribed yet, take advantage of this moment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories like this. With each new episode, we bring intense stories, real or inspired by real life, that make us reflect on the choices we make and the marks we leave. This story makes it clear, betrayal doesn't just destroy a relationship. It hurts memories, shatters bonds, and shakes structures that took years to build. What starts as a slip-up can end as an irreversible rupture with everything that mattered most. But it also teaches us that new beginnings are possible, as long as they are built with truth, humility, and awareness. And that forgiveness, when genuine, has the power to free all parties involved, even if love doesn't survive the storm. And never forget, this channel does not support any type of betrayal. Here, the stories are fiction, but the lessons they bring are absolutely real. Until next time.